Ooh. We're This morning we're going to look at Psalm 65, and David was a farmer, so I can relate to David. He's a guy who sat on the hillside looking after sheep, and he must have got the patience of Job. And but there again, he had a wonderful way with words. He is a wonderful poet. I think I'm a bit loud. All right. Okay, read Psalm 65, reading from verse 9. He said, "You visit the earth and water it. You greatly enrich it. The river of God is full of water. You provide their grain, for you have prepared it. You water the ridges abundantly. You settle its furrows. You make it soft with the showers, and you bless its growth. You crown the year with your goodness, and your paths drip with abundance. They drop on the pastures of the wilderness, and the little hills rejoice on every side. The pastures are clothed with flocks. The valleys are also covered with grain. They shout for joy. They also sing." Oh, what a wonderful passage for Harvest Festival. Giving thanks to our God for what he provides for us. And there are a few verses in there that stand out to me, and it says, "You water the ridges abundantly." And we got a good God that provides for us abundantly. So often we take it for granted. So often we think that it's going to rain anyway. And when it rains, sometimes we think, when's it going to stop? But it isn't going to be very dry long. It isn't going to be dry very long until we cry out, we want some rain. We farmers are never content. Do you realize that? They say it's two things hard to find: is a content farmer and a dead donkey. And you don't find them very often. They always want someone else. Anyway, we got a good God. The children this morning are reading about the parable of the sower. Now I thought I could read that passage, but you know it so well. Some seeds fell on good ground, some fell on stony ground, some fell on thorny grounds. Well, that's what we're going to be looking at this morning. But as a farmer, the importance of being a good farmer is looking after the land. And if you don't look after your land, it don't look after you. So this time of the year, as the rains start to come, we got to start thinking about getting the cattle indoors so they don't poach the pastures up. Because if they poach the pastures up, we don't get a harvest next year. So we take all the cattle indoors, and that we provide silage for them, and we do everything. Well, we look after them like babies. But the thing is, we got to look after the soil. And this morning, I want us to look at our lives as looking after the soil. The way I want us to look at this morning, I've got a dog kennel, and over my dog kennel is an oak tree. And the acorns this year has been absolutely enormous. I don't know if you've noticed, but there's absolutely huge acorns this year. It's like the trees have just enjoyed this summer and made these huge acorns. And every acorn is a seed. Some seeds are absolutely microscopic that you can barely see them. But I like the good old acorn because you can literally split it in half, and inside it's just two halves of energy with a little root ready to grow. And as inside every acorn, all it needs is water. And water will make that outside shell split open, and the root will start to come out, and it forms a great oak tree. Wow. And there's seed and there's potential God has put inside every one of you. And sometimes we don't think, I can't do anything. I haven't got any talents. I haven't got any ability. What can I do? But God has put something inside of every one of us. And there's a seed in there. It might be microscopic, but microscopic seeds can do some wonderful things. Rachel bought a plant about 5 years ago and planted it in a planter on our patio. And it grew, it flowered, and then it's produced seed pods. And every year it produces millions of seeds. Now, I took 6 pods from this little plant and I rubbed them in my hand, and then I blew the shell away, and my hand was covered with actually millions of seeds. And that was only 6 pods. And my hand was like dust. So I took it and I just spread it over a plant pot. And you know what? I think every one of those seeds grew, but they grew that thick that they couldn't grow properly. They were literally choking each other for life. But you know that those are microscopic seeds. Everyone grew. And there's life inside each one of them. And you know, God has put a seed of life in your heart, in your spirit, for you to be successful, for you to be a blessing to the community around us, so that we can be a blessing to God. But those seeds need to be sown in good soil. Now, I'm a bit of a gardener. Well, my hobby, I'm a bit of a gardener. And I go to usually Traeger Mills or somewhere and buy some compost. And I find that if you got a pot of compost and you get it really wet, it goes like a wet, soggy lump. And I think, poor old plants, it's just too wet for them to grow. And they seem to get what I call wet feet, soggy feet. And then they go yellow and they don't thrive very well. So I went on the internet and someone suggested that if you go to the river, where the river flows, there's banks of river silt. Where I went down river, I soon found a bank of river silt. And now I go down with a bucket and I get buckets of river silt and I mix it 50-50 with my compost. And it puts grit into the compost so it don't set tight and hard. Not only that, it makes your compost go twice as far as well. Tell I'm a farmer, you see. But I find the plants are much happier and they grow much healthier. Now, I don't know if that silt has any goodness in it whatsoever. Sorry? It does. I'm sure it does. Because the plants seem to thrive a lot better. Because in the river, there's trace elements. Manganese, magnesium, iron, different things. And the plants seem to find it. And they thrive on it. So, perhaps there is madness in my thinking. But I find it works. All right, so you gardeners, good tip, get down the river and find some river silt next to your compost. It also, what I like doing, if I got a rose bush, I just dehead the rose bush, cut all the leaves off, except for 2 little tiny leaves on the top. I stick it in the plant pot. And in river silt and compost, I get about 95% root. If I do it in compost, I get less than 35% root. So it seems to work. All right, so just a tip for you gardeners, get down and find some river silt. But anyway, it's all about the soil. We don't have wet feet. We want to thrive in God. But you know, we want to have good soil. And the soil is our hearts, our attitude, our mindset. It's what God has done for us. You know, when we were without Christ, we had guilt, we had sin, we had things that used to rob the joy of our lives. But God said, I've taken that away. And I've given you the freedom to have life. And like we were looking at there, life more abundantly. Because God, what does it say? He waters the ridges abundantly with our hearts. God has put a seed in our hearts for us to be the person He created us to be. The problem is not the seed, it's more to do with the soil. Now, scientists could take the seed and they can examine it, and they'll find it's full of life, the potential in every seed. I'll put in here an acorn, will produce an oak tree. A conker, get the chestnut. With apple, pip, get an apple tree. Amazing, isn't it? God says you'll produce after your own kind. You'll reap what you sow. But if our soil is full of stones, probably that acorn would still grow and it would still come up, but it wouldn't thrive and last very long. It don't grow in stones. Well, it does sometimes. It's amazing, isn't it? But it's usually stunted and hasn't got the same potential. Weeds and thorns choke the growth. And we get weeds and we get thorns in our lives. And sometimes we got to stop and say, what's choking my life? What's causing my life to thrive? What's causing my life to be choked out? Because if we plant our seed in unhealthy soil, they don't thrive. So I've put down here, what about the friends we hang out with? Do they encourage us to live a good life? Or do they cause us to compromise our lifestyle? What about the television programs we watch? How many of you get hooked on EastEnders? How many get hooked on Coronation Street? How many get hooked on Emmerdale Farm? There's some rubbish on telly, isn't there? But you know what? We can get hooked on these things, and it's what we feed into our life is what allows our life to thrive and grow. Some people just pull us down and they limit our thinking. They limit our potential. They say, oh, you'll never make it. You'll never do that. Others will say, come on, let's go for it. Apparently Henry Ford was trying to invent a car. And he had the dream that if he could build an engine and put it on a car, it would propel the car along. And he was putting all his thoughts and all his energies trying to build this car. And then one day he met a guy called Ellison, and he came along and he said, hey, you got something going for you there. And that's a brilliant idea. And I'd like to join in and help you build that car. And the two of them put their heads together and they came up with this car. Henry Ford said, I got to the point I was struggling how to get forward. When this guy came alongside me, he encouraged me to keep going. And sometimes we need friends who'll come alongside us and encourage us to keep going, pressing in to what God got us. Friends, there's nothing wrong with the seed that's inside of us. It's what the environment we allow that seed to go through. Have we got stones? Have we got rocks? Have we got weeds choking the life out of each one of us? See, Jesus told that parable about a man who sowed in good seed. Someone else sowed it in rocky ground and it didn't produce very much. Another sowed it in ground that was full of thorns and weeds and it choked the plant as it came up. What made the difference? The difference was the soil. The environment we put ourselves in is extremely important to how we grow the potential in God. I put on here, a good seed depends on good soil. Be selective to who you give your time and attention to. People are contagious. You catch what they've got. And sometimes what they got is not good. Sometimes what they got can be very encouraging. If your friends are negative thinking, don't have no goals, they don't have no motivation, their attitude rubs off on us. Don't let their negativity contaminate your soul. Because our destiny, our future, our ability is valuable to God. God created us so that he could have fellowship with us. He created us so that we could be a blessing to the folks around about us. God said, love your neighbors. Love the people that's around you. You know, God's heart is for us to be generous to our neighborhood. But sometimes we need to make some changes. We need to pull up some weeds. But what about if I give up my friends, I might hurt their feelings? But the other question is, but what about if you miss your destiny in God? We don't need to look at self-development. We need to look at our soil development. Our seed can't grow in the wrong soil. God never asks us to give up something without giving us something back in return. Your seed can set a new standard for your family. As your life changes, your children are going to watch the change in your life, and they're going to imitate what they see. What God has given us is extremely valuable. One day as I was walking down to the farm, I could hear this sound of water pouring out somewhere. And I looked around and I couldn't see what it was. And then as I looked in my neighbor's house, there was his oil tank of kerosene. A pallet had been up against the wall and had blown over in the wind, and it had knocked the pipe off the end of his kerosene tank. And the tank was pouring out this here kerosene into his flower bed. Now, if anybody's a gardener, kerosene, diesel, doesn't grow plants very well. But I saw it pouring out of his tank. So I ran up to the tank and I put my finger over the end of the hole, which stopped the flow of the kerosene. But I thought, well, I can't stay here all day. What am I going to do? Behind me, there's a nut owl bush growing. So I reached for a nut owl bush and I snapped it off, quickly took my knife and sharpened it to a point, and I pushed the nut owl stick up the end of the pipe, which stopped the flow of the oil. But next thing, I saw my neighbor, well, I got a tank for him and he put his kerosene in another tank. And anyway, next thing, he was digging all the soil out where the kerosene had poured into the soil, and he was trying to rescue his plants because, well, kerosene, diesel, it kills everything. And there he was, but he had to replace the soil which had been contaminated. But you know, that's like our lives sometimes. Just one little accident, one little thing, one little blip can contaminate our hearts. And we need to be careful. What we watch on television, what we do, what we meet with every day. You know, sometimes we watch the news. I say 10 minutes is enough, isn't it? It can be so negative. Everything seems to be wrong. You think, you know, poor old Prime Minister, he can't do nothing right, can he? But, you know, it seems like everything, somebody wants to be criticizing somebody all the time. And I think, thank God, there's an on-off button in there. We live in a world where negativity is all around us, but we can choose what we feed our lives with. Put on something that's going to lift you up. Put on some worship music. Put on a good message. Somebody who's going to encourage and build your life up. Build your faith. Jesus was walking along the street one day and a fellow came along and he said, come and pray for my little girl. She's not very well. So Jesus went with the guy to pray for his little daughter. Then another servant came along and said, don't bother Jesus any longer. She's dead. She's gone. Jesus said, she's not dead. She sleeps. And the people laughed. And when he got to the house, they were all weeping because the girl had passed away. And he said, she's not dead. She's sleeping. And they mocked him. They laughed at him. Jesus said, can everyone go outside? Into the room he went with just Peter, James, and John. He took the little girl by the hand and he said, arise. You know, we don't find Jesus preached long prayers, did he? He just said, arise. And up she gets. He took her by the hand and lifted her up. Friends, he put the negativity outside so he could have an environment of faith to believe. Friends, sometimes we got to put the world outside of our lives to allow faith to rise within us. And you know, if Jesus had to do that, so too do we need to watch out what we do in our lives. He has shown how important it is to have the right environment. People can talk us out of our miracle. Things that we're believing God for, the negativity of people can destroy our faith. Moses was out in the desert and he sent 12 spies into the promised land. 10 returned saying, oh, there's giants in the land, we don't stand a hope. The 2 guys called Caleb and Joshua, they came back saying, we're well able. Our God is great. We're well able to take this land. It flows with milk and honey, the abundance of everything there. We are well able to take this land. By the time Moses came back to his people, the negative word had gone throughout the camp. Moses had got 2 million people there saying, we can't go in. There's too many giants, there's too many problems, there's too many difficulties. They listened to the negativity. And because of the negativity, they stayed in the wilderness until that generation died out and God raised up the next generation to take the land. Friends, don't let this generation die out. Let's be the people and take God by his word and say, we can. We are well able because our God is with us. God had promised the people victory. And he promised life, he promised victory, he promised success for you and I in our lives this morning. They didn't enter that promised land because they allowed that negativity to contaminate their soil. You know, find people who will join with you in faith. When you got a miracle to believe God for, find someone who's positive. Find someone who's got stronger faith than you got. So that when you meet with them, they'll say, yes, come on, we're going to believe God together because he's well able. You know, I met a man the other night and he said, I got the start of Parkinson's. I said, yeah, but you serve a mighty God. I said, you don't just serve a mighty God, you serve an almighty God. You serve a God that's supernatural. And I said, let's believe God. And we prayed together to believe for a miracle that his Parkinson's won't be the end, it'll be opportunity. There'll be a next chapter in his life, or even God can heal him completely. But you know, friends, we can look at the negative. We can take the negative and think, this is it. This is my lot. Or we can say, God, this is a window of opportunity for each one of us. Our soil is important for our seed. In the Bible, there's a guy called Elijah. And he walked past a man who was plowing in the fields. Another stupid farmer. He had 2 oxen pulling a plow. But when Elisha saw Elijah, he said, that guy's got something I want. And he took his plow and he smashed it up and he burnt it. He killed his oxen and sacrificed it unto the Lord. And he said, I'm going with this man Elisha because what he got in his life, I need. And he followed Elisha, and he saw Elisha do wonderful miracles. He saw Elisha do great things. And Elisha went with Elijah. And he served Elijah food. He served him in every way he could. He was his right-hand man. And Elijah said to him, if you stay with me until my end, you're going to have a double portion of what I've got. And he said, I want that double portion. But many times Elisha would say to him, you go and let God use you in a different area. No, he said, I'm staying with you. And he stayed with him till the end. And he had a double portion of what God had given to Elijah. He did many miracles because the anointing of Elisha came to Elijah. Elijah came to Elisha. But Elisha could see that what Elijah got was good seed. It was worth planting his life into because he got something that was special in his life. Elisha could have stayed in that field plowing with oxen. He could have stayed with all the friends he'd been brought up with. He could have stayed with his family and everything he had going